I was going to mention also at the Serpent Mound, you see also a wood henge there in the parking lot. There was a wood henge that still to this day you see in the parking lot. When you pull in, you can see where the concrete actually caves in to these spots where a wood henge once stood. Now, one of the other things that's really intriguing that there hasn't been much done on that I know from Jeffrey Wilson is he had mentioned to me that there had been at one point, there was a story told about this woman who now would be probably in her 80s. And when she was a little girl, she used to play at the site, and that there was a cave that she fell into kind of behind the parking lot near where the restrooms are today. And when she fell down into this, she was exploring, and there was caves beneath the ground. Now, from what I've heard, and it's been years since I've heard this story, but from what I've heard, they decided to fill in these caves. There were 3 holes in the ground, and they decided to fill them in because they were a danger. So the best thing that they could do, instead of excavating and putting the manpower and money into actually going through these potential underground caverns, they instead just backfilled them with dump trucks. Basically, they just put loads of soil and earth basically back into these holes to fill them in, to keep them from being an issue for any visitors or liability. And not only that, but also beyond that, there's so many other controversial aspects of the dating of the site in regards to archaeoastronomy. I mean, watching Graham's show, obviously they talk about pushing back the date, 10,000 years, right, from what they have known now. But one of the things that I found really intriguing is there is plenty of evidence besides pushing back to that date, but looking at the lost coil of the serpent, for example, nobody talks about that anymore. There was a lost coil that's been erased, and they have re-engineered the serpent to fit a more modern timeline to align with the different astronomical occurrences. For example, there in the lost coil at one point, if you stood directly in the middle, the indigenous people would have sat there and thought of this as the center of the cosmos. And this would have aligned directly with the old pole star prior to Polaris, which was Thuban, and that was in the constellation Draco. And so I found this, right? And I found that incredibly interesting, but that's not one of the points that anybody talks about. But if this was a site that was engineered to the prior pole star, this automatically pushes the date back beyond the Fort Hood culture, but beyond 1000 AD. We're going back thousands of years already, which that makes perfect sense. And you see this at other sites around the world and around America, like at America's Stonehenge. Yeah, you have a carbon-14 date for this, right? You have these artifacts that allude to a certain time period, but when you take the engineering of the standing stones, of the stone chambers, of all these different sites there, you're ultimately looking at a site that, based on the engineering, is dating back to at least 2000 BC. I mean, we're talking about these incredibly advanced cultures that align with other megalith builders around the world. And I find it just incredible that this is so much history that's not taught in schools. This is all stuff that should be brought into, I think, our everyday learning and understanding of the ancient people here in America. And it's a shame that they're not. And the indigenous people, they're aware of these people that were seafaring culture that came here, and they worked together and they formed bonds. And nobody goes to the indigenous people to talk to them about these ancient cultures, which is just disturbing, because if anybody was going to have a strong idea and understanding of these ancient sites and of these ancient builders of these sites, it would be the indigenous people.
And what I noticed, and you know what, I have to confess, I haven't even seen Ancient Apocalypse yet.
We're going to tell Graham.
Don't tell Graham. I'm going to get to it, and I'm going to get to it soon.
All right.
Have you even seen the one you're in?
No, I haven't.
Oh, wow.
You know what?
I won't tell you how you did then.
You know what? Randall's like me. I don't want to watch these damn episodes. I know how they end. I don't want to look at my face. I don't want to see that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's exactly it. I don't need to see that guy.
I know what I look like, right?
Yes.
Sadly,
unfortunately. Yes. Anyways, I had an actual thought, a coherent thought momentarily there. Yeah. Oh, Where were we? What did you just say, Hayley?
We were talking about ancient sites and megalith builders and how the indigenous
Yeah.
people would have had insight into these locations and into who the builders were.
Yeah. Okay. So the one thing you said that I was not aware of, and maybe I've encountered it, but if I did, I don't remember. But about the lost coil, that's very interesting. I was not, at least I may have heard that or something along the way, but I the significance of it was lost. So that I'm finding very interesting.
Well,
Yes.
Tell them again what the importance.
The importance of that is that it was erased because it was aligned with the pole star of that time period, but with
Really? Okay.
precession,
Yeah.
it changed and there was a new coil built. Do I have that right, Hayley?
Yes, that is correct. The Serpent Mound site was used continuously by different cultures for a very long time. And they used it, obviously, I mentioned that they had a wood henge in the parking lot, and they used that on multiple occasions, actually, to recalculate and to basically, I guess, get everything in order so they could rebuild and re-engineer the site to their purpose and to the correct astronomical alignments for that time period. Now, the coil of the serpent now aligns with true north, and we know that to be true north. However, the lost coil, like I said before, would have aligned with the old pole star Thuban. So you see the shift between the alignment with true north, potentially Polaris now, right? And now before it would have been aligned with Thuban, the old pole star. And so that is one of the things that people don't talk about a lot because it contradicts the archaeological narrative that is being taught today. And as we know, people get a little uncomfy when we start talking about things that challenge the traditional narrative. But on the other hand, it's science, it is astronomy, it is archaeoastronomy here, and it should be treated with the same respect that the narrative is treated with today. And the other thing about Serpent Mound that nobody talks about either is the significant spiritual aspect to it that is still held today. We know that they still have these events here at solstice and at equinox because there are all these alignments that are still occurring there. And it attracts people of all different types of backgrounds. And I've met so many different people. I have met people from so many different Indian tribes, indigenous tribes in the area. I have met Shawnee, I have met Cherokee, I have met Lakota, I have met so many different tribes, and especially local tribes too, to the Ohio area that come there for these events. And they say, oh yeah, we come here because our ancestors came here. They held it to be sacred as well. And one of the things I found really intriguing was I was doing a walk around with Jeffrey Wilson, and he was explaining how at the head of the serpent, there is currently a concrete walkway around the serpent mound. And when you're at the head of the serpent, which is where the sun sets on solstice and has that alignment with the serpent mound, there's actually this hole in the concrete, and it's reminiscent of the holes in the concrete in the parking lot that came from the wood henges, right? So there's that area that continuously caves in because at one point in time, that was used as a hole for a wood post for the henge. Now, at the head of the serpent, this is to the right. If you're standing looking face on towards the front of the serpent, this is to the right of the serpent's head on the walkway. And here, there's also a caved in area. And Jeff's explanation for this was, well, there were some indigenous people. There was specifically a few people or one person that came and was telling of an old tradition that even to this day that was being practiced by the local indigenous people. And that was that there was once a standing post in that area. And what happened on the solstice was that stone, or the standing, I'm so used to saying standing stone, the standing post would have a shadow cast at sunset that would fall upon what was a stone altar that was laid over on its side in the head of the serpent. Now, I know in Ancient Apocalypse, going back to Graham, I know in Ancient Apocalypse, he mentions there was once a stone circle there. Now, I don't know that to be true for sure, but I do know there was several stones there. How they were lined, or if they were even aligned in any specific way, I'm not sure. But I do know there was a horizontally laid out altar stone that was in the head of the serpent in that circle at the top. And what was said to be the tradition of the indigenous people is that they would take all of these round egg-shaped stones that they believed would somehow embody the spirit of a deceased person. And they would take these stones from wherever they were from within I guess, miles from around the area. And I don't know how far and wide this ranged from, but they would bring these egg-shaped stones that supposedly contained the soul of the deceased. They would bring them to Serpent Mound, and they would place them on that horizontally laid altar stone in the head of the serpent. And on solstice, on summer solstice, at the sunset, that wooden pole that sat to the right of the head would cast a shadow upon that altar. And when that shadow was cast upon the altar, supposedly all of those spirits then were able to journey from this world on into the next. And that was the tradition of the indigenous people that spanned not just from one tribe, but through several within the area. And I find that to be just incredible. And what ended up happening to that altar stone was it was actually thrown over the side of the hill. So the top of the serpent's head is right at the crest of this hilltop. And so if you actually walk down around, you can go over and see the stone. And some say that it is archaeoacoustically engineered to produce certain sounds. And I've gone down there, I've meditated with the stone myself. I have gone and experienced it firsthand, and it's incredible. And it rests right beneath this opening in the rock that appears to actually look like a yoni. So a lot of New Age people go there and they pray to the great goddess, and they even meditate with the stone that has appeared to be engineered to produce certain frequencies and certain sounds at the base of this cliff. It's a really intriguing site, and you can also find those egg-shaped stones sprawled all around that cliff top. And they say the reason why that altar stone does not sit in the serpent's head anymore is actually because there was the groundskeeper that was in charge of mowing the serpent and taking care of it. And one day he supposedly decided that it was too much effort to mow around the said altar stone, and he tossed it over the side of the cliff. And that is why it is now on the side of the cliff, and you can still go see it, but around it, like I said, you can find all those egg-shaped stones, which it's a funny story. And the story about the post that maybe cast a shadow onto the altar, that's not something that I've heard in other ancient cultures or in other sites. So I found it to be specifically interesting. And I wonder, perhaps, I always take the opportunity to ask if that is something of a tradition that anyone else has heard of around the world or at any other sites.
Not that I can recall, specifically egg-shaped stones, although, the egg has a lot of very interesting symbolism, particularly in alchemy and Hermetic traditions, and the idea of the serpent with the egg in its mouth, if that's how you interpret it, which is certainly one valid interpretation, has always intrigued me. The other thing is because of my interest in when we talk about archaeoastronomy, I bring in, of course, the thought of the horizon calendar and the celestial vault, the movement of that, how that is projected onto the surface of the earth, and how that becomes the basis for mapping the everything. You can go to the culture of the Southeast, the Chacoan culture, and you find there the San Juan Basin, 10,000 square miles of New Mexico, was laid out as a gigantic astronomical map.
Yeah.
Centered on Chaco Canyon.
Right.
And with the outliers, the roads extending out, the whole thing is like a calendar almost. But there was the thing about Serpent Mound that I found quite intriguing was its connection with the Astrobleme. Are you aware of that, Hayley, that part of the whole?
I feel like I've heard, I can't think off the top of my head, but I am positive I've heard of similar, well, not similar sites necessarily, but other megalithic sites or ancient sites that are also sacred sites around the world that have been founded in areas that are in impact craters that have these bizarre frequencies and different, I guess, magnetic anomalies that tend to draw people to them. And that is something also that's universal, and I feel like probably is challenging the mainstream narrative, because that is one thing that you brought up, and it wasn't even in my mind at the time, but that is something else that you never hear anyone really talk about in mainstream archaeology, even at these other sites around the world, that obviously that plays a large impact, like in Yucatan, for example. You have the same thing at some of these sites, and it's something that no one ever deep dives into, but these people were drawn to an area for some reason, and they decided to set up a sacred ceremonial site there because of that reason. And obviously that is playing a huge part in it. And today I feel like we are so far from I guess just nature in general, and from those natural instincts that we feel being in tune with nature, that we don't pick up on it like our ancient ancestors used to. And
Mhm.
so it's something that we're still trying to understand, and I absolutely want to know more of.
Let me know if you're seeing this, hopefully a black and white aerial view.
Oh, that's, now
Yep.
what age is this?
This was taken, I think, in the late 40s or early 50s.
Wow.
I love this photograph. I
It's
mean,
fantastic.
isn't it though?
Yeah.
But check this out, Scott. I mean, look at the orientation, the laying of the serpent on this natural ridge.
Yes.
And you've got, let's see, it's Brush Creek, and then what the other one is, I don't remember the name of it. But you actually look, and here's, yeah, you see the geomorphology of the landscape
Yep.
is serpentine. And you see the coils of the serpent come around this way if you're seeing my cursor.
Yep.
This way. And then you've got the triangular head of the viper serpent right here. And then I was trying to remember, I've been here several times. You know, you've got these caves down here that almost suggest eyes, perhaps. But, you know, during flooding and during pluvial periods in the past, you had two creeks meeting right here. And this is actually built on the rim of the Astrobleme. You can see how it's raised above the surrounding terrain. It's a downfaulted graben, ring graben, where the I think the dropping was like as much as 1,400 feet. And I just find it interesting, that that when you think about this, one of the consistent symbolical ways of representing celestial events was serpents, right? Serpents, over and over again, we find fireballs, meteorites, comets, etc., being represented as serpents and or dragons.
Right. Yep.
Now, that is not the sole purpose of it. I think because serpents, particularly when you look at the Chinese system, there were celestial serpents and there were terrestrial serpents. The Lung Mai, what they called the dragon lines through the surface of the earth, which absolutely seems to me has to be factored in when we're trying to understand the totality of this ancient science.
Okay, can I ask you a question, Randall?
Yeah.
If I may, and I'm
absolutely.
This is gonna come out of left field, if you will, but have you entertained the possibility that the reason that we have this Serpent Mound where it is, and not coincidentally being associated as an impact site, that the creators of this understood that there was a connection between an extraterrestrial impact and this Serpent Mound structure that they created, and that they did it here? Do you think that this is all connected?
Well, that's certainly the question I'm raising, and I don't know the answer to it, but you know, it's certainly coincidental if it was not intentional.